Hi everyone, I'm Sandy and today is Poetry Thursday. I unfortunately still don't feel quite comfortable trying to read poetry on camera, on screen, and sharing it with all of you. It's not something I've ever done, and so what I thought I would do is actually talk about and celebrate Shaketember. If you're not familiar with the Shaketember event, it's being hosted by 4 different fantastic booktubers, which are Steve Donahue, Rainy over at Rainy Day Reads, Lukash at A Cruel Reader's Thesis, Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. And they had selected 4 plays that they would read through the month of September, and it really inspired me to try and read some Shakespeare. I have not read Shakespeare since high school, which was, a few years ago now. So it was really fun to take this opportunity to really pick up Shakespeare again and then come back and share my experience with everyone here. So I hope you enjoy this. And then at the end, I will also share a recent purchase. So for today, I'm going to go through a couple of the Shakespeare plays and one retelling. So let's go ahead and jump right into some Shakespeare. So I picked the first play for 3 reasons. The first one, and it's not one of the 4 that the host selected. I picked it because 1, I had read it before, 2, because it was the most kind of well-known one to me at least, and then the third reason is because I did have a retelling that I really did want to try and read at the same time. And the book that I actually, or the play that I actually ended up reading first was actually Romeo and Juliet. And so this is in this monstrous volume of the complete works of William Shakespeare that I got at Barnes & Noble. And as you can see in here, it has really pretty end papers and really beautiful ends. It is a brick to hold though, and then the back is really pretty as well. But Romeo and Juliet is the first play that I picked up. And so with this, it is the story of star-crossed lovers in Romeo and Juliet who are on opposite sides of warring families, and they it is one of Shakespeare's tragedies. They do not have, unfortunately, a happy ending. I don't want to spoil Romeo and Juliet for you if you're not familiar with Romeo and Juliet. There are a number of film adaptations for it, so it is one that you can easily kind of dip your toe into and start reading some Shakespeare or watching some adaptations, and it is very understandable. There were aspects of Romeo and Juliet that I completely forgot, so I did not remember the Tybalt character or Mercutio. I'm butchering these names. My mouth does not want to speak today. So I didn't remember parts of that, but what I did realize as reading it through it, this Romeo and Juliet has some of the most recognizable quotes for me personally. Reading through it, there were a couple that were very obvious ones, and here I'm going to try and read Shakespeare on camera. Okay, let's see how this goes. The first one is, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. That one was one I've always remembered. The next one is, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Again, I really do remember that one. And then there's one in here that is a very familiar quote for me, but wasn't one I remembered from being in Romeo and Juliet, which was, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I didn't remember those. So those were a few of the ones. It was a perfect choice for me to kind of dip in and try reading some Shakespeare. And it was a really good experience for me to pick this one up first. But with that, the retelling that I ended up picking up was actually These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. So this is very much a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. This is a debut novel by this author. It was published in 2020. And there are, the title is very much from Romeo and Juliet. There's a line in there, at the very front of this book, which is also, I've tracked it down in the play. These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and power, which as they kiss consume. That is definitely, absolutely in Romeo and Juliet. I believe it's in Act 2, Scene 6 or Scene 5, if I remember correctly. I did look that up, by the way. So with this one, you have a character whose name is Juliet Kai and a character whose name is Roma Montagov, and they are on opposite sides of dueling families in 1920 Shanghai. And that is kind of where the similarities to Romeo and Juliet really ends. They have a white flower gang, and they have a scarlet gang in here. So I wrote it down. I have a post-it on the back with notes. They have a scarlet gang, and the gangs are instructed to kill others on the other side if they come across them. So it is this name of violent is very well earned in this retelling. But in Romeo and Juliet, they didn't know each other, and upon first meeting they instantly fell in love. In this, they knew each other as teenagers. There was a traumatic event, a catastrophic event that separated them, and this, at the point this starts, they have been reunited in Shanghai. And the other difference with this is there is something called the madness in this, and the madness is something that makes people want to tear their throats out. So there's a lot of blood and gore in this. There are characters that kind of are similar to Romeo and Juliet. There's a Tyler instead of a Tybalt or Tybalt. I'm not sure how you say the Shakespeare name. And then there is a I'm trying to remember the other name now, and it's escaping me. Anyway, so there are some related characters to Romeo and Juliet. Tyler is her cousin, or is, I believe, is the nephew in the family. And so you do have those kind of similarities. But as Roma, I keep trying to say Romeo, as Roma and Juliet have to come to work together to try and solve what the madness is, their families do not want them together, do not want them working together, were instrumental in their first separation. And so it is one that you go through a lot of different storylines and a lot of different trying to figure out what this madness is, and trying to see, are they going to be able to work together at the same time avoiding their families, and all of those different pieces. And it is a very entertaining story. It is more geared towards young YA audiences, except for the violent part, because like I said, there is quite a bit of gross violence and gore in this a little bit. But that is really there is a very, very big difference between Romeo and Juliet and this from the actual storyline. The other thing with this that I did not realize until the very end is that this is the first in a series, and so it did end without everything being resolved. I didn't know, or don't know what will obviously happen next, and they kind of end up in a position where Roma and Juliet aren't necessarily able to talk to each other. So I don't want to give any spoilers, but if you like kind of that if the premise sounds good, just kind of go into it not really thinking of it as being Romeo and Juliet. Think of it as a cool story in 1920 Shanghai with two warring families, and you probably would like this one. But look, by the way, at this gorgeous cover. I just think that's absolutely amazing. And so that was the first kind of combination. I'll try and hold it up. This is a brick of William Shakespeare and These Violent Delights, and just the differences between those two. I'm trying to hold them so they're nice and pretty, and I'm not good at that. But so that was the first one. And then I'll put these down. And then the second one that I decided to pick up was one that one of the four hosts had selected, which was actually not last week, but I believe the week before's play, which was The Tempest. And so this is, when I looked it up, is a tragic comedy is what it was described as. So there's some tragedy and then some comedy in this one. Talking about my experience trying to read this one. So this is a play I was not familiar with, and trying to decide, didn't really know anything about the story at all. And I picked up this nice little helper one rather than trying to read it out of the big brick of a book that I have. With this one, I read the first act and didn't really understand it. And so even with this helper and trying to get the it has nice little definitions in here if you kind of get stuck. What I didn't notice is that there's also a really interesting, a summary kind of here that tells you a little bit more what was going on. I wasn't reading that. I was just reading the actual play part and didn't really understand what was going on. So what I did is I went on YouTube and found a couple of it was just kind of descriptions of the story, which helped significantly. And then I actually went and ended up finding a free audiobook of a group who actually performed The Tempest and got to listen to that at the same time I read it. And that made a world of difference for this. It helped me completely understand the story. It helped me follow the story, and it helped me really care about the story and care about the characters. So this, the play itself starts at the point where you're on a ship that is in grave danger and is in this big storm, and everyone thinks that they're going to die and be shipwrecked. And what you find right after that is it was actually you have a magical island where the character of Prospero and his daughter Matilda, I think it was Matilda, Miranda, where you have Prospero and Miranda have been marooned on this magical island, and the people that were on the ship were the people who exiled them to the magical island. And so the magical island allows Prospero to kind of impact the ship as it comes too close to their island, and there is a lot of intrigue and shenanigans that happen. There's some magical characters that Prospero is able to bring about and is able to influence them to kind of impact the ship and impact the other people. And my favorite kind of scene in this is one where one of the magical creatures, there's a magical creature who is unhappy and ends up with two of the people from the ship who basically give him, I believe it was give him alcohol, so some drunken shenanigans, and then the other mystical creature comes in and messes with them, and it is hilarious. That scene is by far, I think, my favorite scene in this. And so the people on the ship think that they're, in serious trouble. They think that the ship has been destroyed, even though the ship, it turns out, was completely fine. And Ferdinand, which is the son, they thought he was dead. It turns out he is on the island and is now in love interest of Miranda, and it is delightful, this particular play. I had no idea, like I said, when I went into this, what the story was all about, and I really enjoyed it. I do, if you want to try and pick this up and you haven't picked it up, definitely try and get the audiobook. I'd heard that before about needing to see Shakespeare performed, and that was something that definitely, even listening to it be performed, seriously helped me. And also with the audiobook, one thing I did notice, I was reading it at the same time as listening to it, they skipped sections or paragraphs in the play. And so every time that happened, I would pause the audiobook and go back and read the rest of it and try and reconsume it. And then I watched the 1 hour Zoom call with the host of Shaketember, and all of that helped me as well. What was really interesting to me about this particular play as compared to Romeo and Juliet, where I immediately recognized lines out of that, I did not have that same reaction to The Tempest. So I don't know if it's just because it was my first time reading it, and now in culture, if I hear references to it, I will recognize them, but I did not have the same type of just overall recognition of storylines and quotes in this that I had with Romeo and Juliet, or with something like Hamlet with to be or not to be. So yeah, both of those just slightly different experiences, but I'm so glad I picked up The Tempest. I had a lot of fun reading this. I understand now, one of my subscribers has told me that there is a retelling of this that was written by Margaret Atwood. I believe it's called Hagwood, if I remember correctly. Now I'm super interested to read that one and see what that one's like. But The Tempest, that is the second Shakespeare play that I actually read in September. So there were two other plays for Shaketember that the hosts were doing. One was Henry IV Part 1, and I have read about the first couple of scenes in it, and I'm having some trouble getting into it, and I was going to go do the same thing of an audiobook, and I'd have to pay for it. I couldn't find one that I liked that was free. So I'm still trying to figure out how to kind of incorporate that same thing with Henry IV Part 1. They're also doing A Winter's Tale, which I believe is this week's. Maybe I'm back. Yeah. Yes, I think that's true. This week's is A Winter's Tale. And I'm just not going to be able to have time to read that, unfortunately. It just, I'm doing a couple group reads, or a couple buddy reads right now, and that is taking the bulk of my reading time in the morning. And if you watched my September TBR, I had referenced maybe hoping to get to read Hamlet, because I have on my desk Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which is, I believe, supposed to be Hamlet's son, if I remember correctly. So I really wanted to read Hamlet before I read Hamnet, and I'm just not going to be able to get to this one either, as much as I had grand ambitions or grand ideas of being able to read it. I don't want to rush through Shakespeare. I really want to experience it. So I'm not giving up on the idea of reading it, but I'm not going to be able to read it for September and be able to read Hamnet as well. Outside of that, the other thing I wanted to share, since it is Poetry Thursday, I thought I would share my recent purchase, and this is because of Steve Donahue. I posted this on my Instagram. I have the link in my description. If you're not following my Instagram, you can definitely go and check that out. But I ended up buying this, which is World Poetry, an anthology of verse from antiquity to our time. And I, like I said, saw this on Poetry Thursday a couple weeks ago on Steve Donahue's channel, and he highly recommended it. And of course, I had to go buy it. It is a massive, massive book, but I really would like to get to the point where I feel like I can read some poetry for Poetry Thursday, maybe sometime soon. We'll see if I ever get to that point. If you'd like to see me try and butcher some poetry, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see. I don't know. I still don't feel quite ready, but anyway, this is the book that I ended up buying for Poetry Thursday, and hoping to dip my toes into this one as well. But with that, I think that will conclude my Shaketember update, and also for my Poetry Thursday. That's not really poetry, but Poetry Thursday. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you've read either of these plays, or if you have read anything out of this book, or have any recommendations on where you think I should start dipping my toes in out of this poetry book. And with that, as always, until next time, everyone, thanks.